Nikola Vucevic was just rated as one of the top 5 most overrated players in the NBA over the last 5 seasons. Also, it's time to regrade that trade that brought Nikola Vucevic to the Chicago Bulls. We're going to look at all that, plus why the Nikola Vucevic trade should be a cautionary tale of this front office on why they should not rush the process. We're going to get to all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today. So, Bleach Report recently came out with a list of the top 5 overrated players in the last 5 years. And Nikola Vucevic came in at number 4 on that list. So, not number 1, but in the top 5. And of course, they pointed out the fact that while Nikola Vucevic is a former All-Star who has averaged double-doubles over the last few seasons of his career, he's a double-double machine. But they point out the fact that is Nikola Vucevic they view Nikola Vucevic as an empty calorie stat stuffer, specifically during his time with the Chicago Bulls. They also point out how Nikola Vucevic, the year before they acquired the Chicago Bulls acquired Nikola Vucevic, the defensive rating with Vooch on the floor for the Magic was 8.2 points worse per possession with him on the court. And so saying that the Bulls should have seen the signs that Nikola Vucevic of being a weak defender, even the fact that, he's never really shot really well from three outside that season before the Bulls traded for him, as well as far as volume threes on top of that. And then they do point out some positives about Vooch. The fact that he has a nice assist rate. He's actually in the 90th percentile for his position of assist rate. He rarely has turnovers on top of things. And he isn't necessarily a high usage piece, but he is somebody that does score efficiently because of where he is. But the fact that he doesn't draw fouls, he doesn't really shoot the three ball well, the low rate that he hits at rim attempts as well, all those things point towards, in their opinion, Nikola Vucevic being one of the more overrated players in the NBA over the last 5 years. And, I get where they're coming at with that. There's no doubt about it that Nikola Vucevic's impact for the Bulls has not been what the Bulls had hoped it was going to be, has not been as consistent. And his defense, we knew what the defense was. I really always kind of not really blame Vooch for the defense, only because the Bulls knew who the defender, or they should have known who Vooch was as a defender before we got him in here. When you look at it, Nikola Vucevic's first full season with the Bulls, this is the full year after we traded for him. So this is with DeMar and Lonzo and Alex Caruso on the team. He played 73 games. He averaged 17.6 points per game and 11 rebounds. He did that on 31% shooting from three and 47% shooting from the field. The next season, he kept that same 17.6 points per game and 11 rebounds, but the efficiency went up. He was almost 35% from three-point range, taking 4.5 per game, and he was 52% from the field. Last year came back down a little bit. 18 points per game, 10.5 rebounds, 48.4% from the field, and 29% from three-point range, taking 4.1 three-pointers per game. And so the question is that when you look at a player being overrated, and you look at Nikola Vucevic being called overrated, I look at it as this way, regardless of how you rate Vooch, right? Because I think there's enough criticism around from Bulls fans, and maybe I'm so zoomed in, I don't know how the NBA world views Vooch, but it's not even just is he overrated or not. It's just the fact that Vooch has just not been as effective as we would have liked for the Chicago Bulls over the course of this. Now, it's up to the team when you acquire somebody to build pieces around him. Vooch has basically always had Patrick Williams or a 6'4" guard next to him at that power forward position since he's been here as well. That's another thing that you have to look at. Again, that's just kind of what comes as part of the course, right? And I don't think the Bulls have necessarily, when you look at adding in DeMar, while we know what DeMar was to the team, him and Vooch like to occupy the same space on the floor. So that was always going to be, kind of a rough fit. And the team built something that was fragile, right? It looked much better when Lonzo was out there, but Lonzo was such a special piece that it's hard to replace. And so the Bulls never quite looked the same. Vooch never quite had the impact that the Bulls were hoping that Vooch was going to have when they traded for Nikola Vucevic. And it just leads to this thing to where they didn't get the return on their investment that they thought, which we're going to regrade that trade here in a second, because Bleach Report also did that in a separate article. But let's look at the rest of this list. So at number 5 was Andrew Wiggins. as far as top 5 overrated players. We already talked about Nikola Vucevic. He was at number 4. At number 3, they had DeAndre Ayton. I think there's no mistake. Him, Ayton and Vooch, they're damn near have had the same disappointments. It's just how their career has gone. Even though DeAndre Ayton is much younger, he still has chance absolutely to turn it around. Ben Simmons, honestly, Ben Simmons should be number 1 on this list, but they have James Harden number 1 on this list. And to me, even with this, when you look at the stats that James Harden has put up, that would keep me from putting him above a Ben Simmons because Ben Simmons can't even get on the floor, right? He can't even get on the floor, and he's still getting paid a huge amount of money. And so that's the only thing that I disagree with on this list. But again, I do agree with James Harden being on the list. I just kind of disagree with James Harden's placement on the list. His teams have gotten to the playoffs. Yes, his performance in the playoffs hasn't necessarily been the best over the course of that time either. But it is what it is when it comes down to it. That's their list. Let me know who you guys think are the most overrated players in the NBA. And how do you think about Vooch? Is he an overrated player? Is he a player that, is productive in what he does and maybe he shouldn't be viewed the way that he is? And you just look at Vooch as he's a solid center that can get you a double-double, but you need to really have solid defenders around him to help mitigate. And again, solid defenders and shooters so you don't need Vooch to shoot threes. The one thing that I hope that we see from Vooch this upcoming season, because he's still going to be in a Bulls uniform for at least part of the season, is stay your big ass in the paint. That's what I've said for so long with Vooch, especially over this all season. Just stay your ass in the paint. That's all I need you to do, right? We don't need you to shoot threes. We don't need you to try to be this stretch big because it just hasn't been effective. Now, still use your three-point shot. There are going to be times where we do need you. And to his credit, Vooch has hit some big three-point shots for the Bulls down the stretches of some games. I think more so the season before last than last year. But you need to use your three to complement your game. It doesn't really need to be a featured part of your game. That time has passed Nikola Vucevic up. And when you hear things like Jalen Smith has been given or promised or told that he's going to get an opportunity to maybe earn that starting role, I think that it just comes down to it may be time. It may be time, but we'll see what comes about of that. But with that said, let's regrade. And this is something that I haven't really done a whole lot, is go back and kind of regrade trades. I've gone back and say, hey, yeah, we lost that trade. Oh, no, I think we did better in that trade than what people think. The next time that we'll do this is probably going to be the Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey trade in like 3 years to reevaluate that trade. But Nikola Vucevic. So we gave up Vooch and Al-Farouq Amino. I'm sorry, we got Vooch and Al-Farouq Amino, and we gave up Wendell Carter, Otto Porter Jr., a 2021 first-round pick that became Franz Wagner, and a 2023 first-round pick that became Jet Howard. Now, when you start looking at those type of things, like the Wendell Carter for Vooch thing, it's neither here nor there to me on that one. Yes, Wendell Carter is a much younger player. Yes, you would have a longer runway with Wendell Carter being here instead of Nikola Vucevic. Their kind of defensive impacts have been almost the same. Like Wendell Carter to me is a player that just hasn't really improved since he left the Chicago Bulls. He got more opportunity, and initially, when he initially got traded to the Orlando Magic, that first full season, of course, he had the best season of his career. He averaged 15 points per game and 10.5 rebounds, which is just a little bit less than what Vooch averaged that same season. And he shot 32% from three. Again, Wendell Carter was another big that when we drafted, we thought that he was going to be able to bring some stretch floor mentality. He never has. Over the course of his career with the Orlando Magic, he's basically averaged right at 8 rebounds per game and about 14 points per game as well over the course of his career with the Orlando Magic. That's not terrible. That is worse than Vooch in the actual, if you're just looking at the raw numbers. Also, Vooch has been wildly more healthy than what Wendell Carter has been. So again, I'm not too worried about the Wendell for Vooch aspect of it. To me, that part is a wash. But the other parts that you gave up a pick that became Franz Wagner. And while there's no guarantee that the Bulls would have drafted Wagner to this team, or even if they did, he would have developed in the same way that he did. Because again, you have questions about the Bulls and development. You can't deny that that's a hell of a piece to give up. He was like their second leading scorer last year, averaging 19.7 points per game on 48% shooting, 28% from three, but also 3.7 rebounds, 3.7 assists, 5.3 rebounds, 1 steal per game. Franz Wagner has turned into a really solid player, and he just got a max level contract for it because of that. And then on top of that, he's still only 22 years old. He's still scratching the surface of who he can be as an NBA player, and giving that up is a huge knock. 6'10", 220 pounds. Listen, had we drafted Wagner here, he would probably be the starting for instead of Patrick Williams at this point, considering how Patrick Williams' career has gone compared to Wagner's career. And so you got to look at that part as well when it comes down to it. Now, the Jet Howard piece, that's still something that we don't quite know for sure yet. He didn't play a whole lot for that team last season, so you're still kind of looking to see what he turns into. But just the Wagner piece, the Franz Wagner piece of that at all is enough to say that the Bulls absolutely lost that trade. Like, I don't think there's any questions about it. Then you still got a 6'6", 215-pound wing in Jet Howard, who hasn't played a whole hell of a lot yet, but he was the 11th overall pick. And so we'll see what he ends up turning into, but he can make this trade look even worse for the Bulls. So in Bleacher Report's regrading of this trade, they gave the Magic a D. I'm sorry, they gave the Bulls a D and gave the Magic an A. And I think that that's fair, and that's unfortunate when you look at this was one of the first moves that the Bulls made that signified they were trying to win now. That they were going from this young team that was unproven, that couldn't win games, that they were making win now moves, or in their mind, win now moves to try to make this team a playoff team to try to hold on to Zach LaVine. Now, somebody could say, well, Haize, you need to factor that part into this trade conversation, into this regrade as well, because what if you didn't trade for Nikola Vucevic and you end up losing Zach in the long term? Because then, does Lonzo come? Does DeMar come? Do those things happen? And if they don't, does Zach LaVine end up staying? And the response that I would have to that is, well, now they're trying to get rid of Zach LaVine. So, that's all in the wash when it comes down to it. And because of his contract, that being one of the bigger determining factors on why they haven't been able to move on from Zach yet. So there's a lot of things if you start adding different layers into it. But overall, just this trade, yeah, the Bulls didn't win this trade. This is a complete, I would even say the regrade of it in the long term is an F, because the Magic have passed us up now as a team in the Eastern Conference with a much brighter future right now than what the Chicago Bulls have shown. And a big part of that is having Franz Wagner there and having him paired next to Paolo Banchero. That is it's just facts of the matter. And so it's an unfortunate thing when you look back on it. It is what it is. It woulda, coulda, shoulda. It's spilt milk at this point. But what can the Bulls learn from this? And that is the most important part of it. And that brings us to our next topic. The Nikola Vucevic trade for this front office should be a part of the cautionary tale of why you can't skip the process, why it does not work out typically to skip the process. Now, there are teams that are able to trade for all-star players that help take their team to the next level. Generally, those are teams that have already shown that they have players that are at the superstar level, which the Bulls did not and have not still shown, and that is part of this problem as well, is that the Bulls made a move to become this playoff team. You should not be giving up future assets, future first-round picks just to become a playoff team. If you give up future first-round picks, it should be that you're already a playoff team, and that's the moves that you think is going to get your team over the top. That is what you should look at. Even when you look at, let's just go across the top 4 to 5 teams in the league. The best team last season in the league, of course, was the Boston Celtics. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, those are 2 players that they drafted in-house. When you add into the fact of that they got those players in part because of trades that they made for star-level players. They sent out the stars and got these future first-round picks, and then they were smart on top of that. Next, the OKC Thunder. OKC Thunder, much like the Boston Celtics, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was one of the players that they got from trading a star, right? Let's be clear there that they made a trade for a player that was basically a star-level player. But outside of that, they've drafted those guys. Now, they have acquired a lot of draft picks, but again, they were able to acquire a lot of draft picks because they gave up really good talent, and then they've built organically through the draft basically since then. Yeah, they brought in Alex Caruso this year, who's definitely going to help them. You're welcome. So those type of things. But again, a team that is built organically through the draft and then has now tried to add something that they were missing by using one of the pieces that they drafted, right? So that's the difference. The Denver Nuggets, 2 main pieces that they have on that team, 3 actually, if you count Michael Porter Jr., Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, they drafted those players. They developed those players within. Of course, they've went out and got an Aaron Gordon who came in and helped that team ended up winning a title, right? They brought in some role players over the course of that time. Again, but the base, some of the pillars on that team were based off players that they drafted. Next up in the top 4, the Minnesota Timberwolves, a perfect mixture of both. They got Karl Anthony Towns there. They got Anthony Edwards there, 2 players that they drafted. But then when you look around it, they went out and got a Rudy Gobert who they're able to trade for to add to a solid base they already have, right? You got that. You got Naz Reid on that team, another player that they are clearly better when he's on the court. They drafted Naz Reid as well, right? So they did not skip the process. They waited till they had a base. Then they made a move for a star that was available. And for the most part, you saw the run that they went on. Now they need to still prove that they can get over the hump, but they have a much brighter future because of the players that they drafted to that team and then were able to supplement that by adding it. The Clippers round out the top 5. This is a team that's basically all brought in talent. Not a lot of players drafted there. The Clippers are, they're exception to the rule. And then right below them, though, the Dallas Mavericks. Again, they drafted Luka. That's going to bring now. They went out and traded for Kyrie, things like that. They also got Derek Lively, but they again, you set your pillar. You have a superstar there. You then went out and got other pieces. Next behind them is the New York Knicks. Again, that's another exception to the rule. They acquired most of those pieces in trades and end up building them up. So that's the thing that this Bulls team needs to learn from the Nikola Vucevic trade. It's not that you shouldn't be aggressive. It's not that type of thing. You don't rush the process. And by the process, I'm not talking about like what the Philadelphia 76ers did. I'm not saying be bad for a long time, but I'm saying that have your base first. You should not be making trades just to make you a playoff team. You should be making trades and you can make trades to be a playoff team, but don't give up future assets, future first round picks just to become a playoff team. Don't do that. Right now, you look at it, we're still suffering from that in the DeMar DeRozan trade because now, even with the Bulls going a younger direction, they still have to kind of play both sides to see where they're going to go because you gave up a first-round pick to bring DeMar in here. Yeah, it's protected, but you still gave one up, right? And so things that the Bulls should learn from the Nikola Vucevic trade, like I said, don't rush to put a playoff team together. Build a playoff team organically first, and then make your moves to supplement an already playoff team that you have. Develop your young pieces. Develop. That is one thing that I hope this Bulls team learns over this next phase so much is develop your guys, man. Develop your young pieces. And that is something that builds something more sustainable for your team. When you build your own young pieces, right? That keeps them on a fairly cost-controlled contract, unless, of course, they ascend to like MVP superstar level. But it's just easier to take advantage. Like, let's say, for example, that the Bulls had Josh Giddey. Let's just say, over the course of his career, right? And by now, you would have been able to take advantage of the fact that you would have a point guard that could get a lot of triple doubles for you, and you can add something to your team before you have to extend that player. Now, the Bulls are getting him right before he needs to be extended, so there you go there. But like, that's the type of thing that you need to look at and think about. For example, to get back to the Vooch aspect of it, let's say you didn't make that Vooch trade. Let's say you just kept Wendell Carter Jr. You extended him, right? His contract isn't nearly as bad as Nikola Vucevic. Then you would have got this leak from Kobe and from Ayo Dosunmu. And you could have made the decision to move off of Wendell Carter or anything else. Like, you would have had more flexibility. Build organically. That's what this team needs to do. But this Bulls front office can't let their failures keep them from being aggressive. Make moves to get your guy, right? That's one thing that I would love to see the Bulls do. They have one first-round pick that they owe to the San Antonio Spurs. Other than that, they own all their own first-round picks from here going forward. They got a couple of seconds back in the trade for DeMar DeRozan, more assets, like more flexibility. We'll see what other things that you can acquire. But if you're in the draft and you see a guy that you feel is your star-level player, go out and be aggressive in getting that guy and adding him to your team. But also, think about the future. That is one thing that this team hasn't necessarily done the best, is future project with contracts and the salary cap. That is one thing that the Chicago Bears and Ryan Poles do amazingly well, right? He future forecasts to make sure he always maintains some form of flexibility with the cap room. Now, while the Bulls have a little bit now, they still have about $4 million beneath the luxury tax now. I mean, everything else, you're hard capped, and that's by design, right? But those type of things, you have to be aggressive in getting your guy in the draft, right? If you truly see that, get those bites at the apple. But also think going forward. That is one thing this front office has not done a very good job at all, is future forecasting. How many people have talked about what the Bulls could have gotten at the trade deadline last year for the same pieces that they ended up trading off this year? And I understand people are going to say, but what about the ownership? Ownership. Reportedly, there was a mandate by ownership to make the playoffs. Again, you put yourself there, right? So to me, you got to think about things in the future a little bit better than what you did over this next phase. I know some Bulls fans are thinking, hoping, wishing that this front office is coming to the end, and I don't think so. Like 5 years in, they're getting at least a decade. We got at least 5 more years of that. And if they start making the playoffs more consistently, of course, we're going to It's going to be longer than that. So we'll see what happens. Over the course of this retooling, rebuild, whatever you want to call it, I just hope that this Chicago Bulls team has learned from their past mistakes. And one of those biggest past mistakes was the Nikola Vucevic trade when it's all said and done. Again, hindsight's 2020, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but make better decisions. And let's hope that the Chicago Bulls are prepared to start doing that. But guys, thank you for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.